Good evening, and welcome to Making Michigan, the Bentley Historical Library series on the history of the University of Michigan. I'm Andrew Rutledge, Bentley historian and research associate, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to the historic Detroit Observatory, a division of the Bentley. I also want to welcome our online audience on YouTube. Thank you all for joining us on this fairly warm May evening. It's too hot for a jacket, I'm just going to say that, but thank you. Tonight, we'd like to share with you all our 4th annual Wolverine Writers event, when our 3 speakers will discuss a trio of stories that, as our title indicates, deal with the hidden sides of the notable and the infamous. Now, as we all know, famous people, well, they're famous through news coverage, the internet, books, cultural osmosis, and dozens of other ways. It's very easy to think we know what a famous person is like, especially when they're people like the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, Dr. Jack Kevorkian, and former University of Michigan President Robin Fleming. But every one of us has multiple sides, different facets of our character, and those famous for something, especially when that thing they're famous for is infamous, or worse, or controversial, often have their innate complexity obscured by whatever that famous something is. We think we know them, but we don't. And that's what I think makes the University of Michigan's libraries and archives, like the Bentley, the William L. Clements Library, and M Library Special Collections, so amazing. The treasure trove of records they all possess reveal the hidden side to famous figures and of literally thousands of others who are less well known than they should be. But tonight, I'm thrilled to welcome 3 individuals who, as editors and writers, have uncovered the previously unknown sides of 3 of these people. And I think you'll find the stories they discuss and the process by which they drafted, thought about, and created them insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little moving. I thought so, at least. But our panelists, in the order in which they will speak, are Deborah Holdship, the editor of Michigan Today, a digital monthly magazine distributed to 500,000 U of M graduates, faculty, and staff worldwide. She also produces the podcast, Listen in Michigan, which she describes as, quote, an audio postcard to alumni from their old Ann Arbor stomping grounds. Deborah joined the university in 2007 as the editorial manager in marketing and communication at the Ross School of Business. And prior to that, she worked at the UCLA Anderson School of Management, and before that, as a reporter and editor at Billboard magazine. Katie Vloot is the editorial manager of LSA Magazine, the alumni magazine of the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts at U of M. Every month, she reaches an audience of over 200,000 alumni, LSA students, faculty, and staff. She was previously the editor of Medicine at Michigan, so many M's in these titles, and began her career as a reporter at the St. Petersburg Times in Florida. Our final speaker is Kim Clark, senior writer at the Bentley. She has worked in U of M communications since 1994 and has worn many hats in that time, including manager of the U of M Heritage Project, directing communications for the U of M Bicentennial Office, and serving as director of executive communication for former U of M president Mary Sue Coleman. She was the editor of the volume Always Leading, Forever Valued, about the history of U of M, and is associate editor of the upcoming Our Michigan. And before joining U of M, she was a reporter and editor for several newspapers, including covering U of M for the Ann Arbor News. Please join me in welcoming all of our speakers.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. As Andrew noted, I am the editor of Michigan Today and also produced this podcast called Listen in Michigan. I made about 60 episodes. I don't make it anymore. But as is often the case with these presentations, my colleagues are going to describe stories that they've written using the archives that they discovered and produced by mining the archives. My presentation puts a little twist on the assignment by making it the archive and the archivist are my story. And I produced the piece as a podcast so that the archivist was able to tell the story themselves versus, their words are more interesting than mine. So this is my way of sharing the wonders of the archives and the libraries across campus. And in this case, showcasing one of our really talented archivist who also demonstrates a tremendous amount of integrity as you'll see when she is dealing with a controversial and somewhat provocative archive like that of Ted Kaczynski. And her name is Julie Harada. All right, I have to find my little advancement arrow. Ta-da! So Julie is the curator of the Joseph A. Labadie collection here at the library in the special collections, and she had a most unusual experience pursuing, acquiring, and now managing the archive of Unabomber Ted Kaczynski. Joseph Labadie was a Detroit labor organizer who donated his materials to U of M in 1911. And over the years, the collection has grown to include materials related to the movements you see on the screen. In April of 1996, Ted Kaczynski was arrested in a secluded cabin in Montana, thus ending a 17-year bombing campaign whose targets included airlines and universities. Michigan psychology professor James McConnell received a mail bomb from Kaczynski in 1985, and his grad student intercepted the package, suffering serious injuries and hearing loss upon the explosion. And McConnell was injured also. An academic himself, Kaczynski had gotten his BA at Harvard and completed his master's and PhD here in Ann Arbor. In 1971, he was on an upward trajectory on the UC Berkeley faculty before dropping out of society and retreating to the Montana woods. There, he developed very specific theories about technology and society while building and mailing small bombs like the one you see here that killed 3 people and injured 23 others. He eluded authorities for about 20 years, and in that time, the feds gave him the code name Unabomb. In the meantime, due to his affinity for universities, airlines, and bombs, and the press ultimately dubbed him the Unabomber. Prior to his capture, Kaczynski sought to explain himself by sending a 35,000-word manifesto titled Society and Its Future to the New York Times. This was 1995, and he stated he would stop the bombing if the paper printed the anonymous diatribe. The Washington Post also printed the rambling dissertation. As Julie noted, he could have used an editor. But it's strangely prescient, warning about the dangers of technology on modern society. Once Kaczynski's brother read the newspaper, he called the FBI. The editorial voice, not to mention the anti-tech screed, it had struck a familiar chord. He recognized it. The brother wasn't the only one who heard something familiar in that manifesto. U of M's own Julie Harada, curator of the Labadie collection, identified themes that she often pursues for her work: left-wing political movements, social protest movements, primitivist movements, I said it, anarchism, and more. So she was activated, and she said when she saw the manifesto, which was still anonymous, no one was sure who had written it, she said, that's the kind of thing I would collect for the Labadie collection if it had been just anybody's manifesto. A lot of people were talking about it in the radical press and other conversations I would hear. There was a lot of interest in it. She'd have to be patient, though, because the manifesto's author remained unknown. Until a year after publication, when the feds identified and arrested Kaczynski, thanks to the brother's help. And in 1996, the Unabomber was done, and his crimes finally came to an end. But for Julie, this journey was just beginning. Now she had a name and location to go with the manifesto. Ted Kaczynski, a U of M alum no less, seems like we're attached to everything in the universe, and he was at the time locked up in the Sacramento County Jail. So it took years of correspondence, but by 1999, she had secured a signed gift agreement with the convicted murderer. And as heinous as his acts were, Kaczynski was really lucky, and he got a gift from the universe the first time he heard from Julie. And he made a very wise choice in trusting her with his archive. To be clear, there wasn't a lot of competition for the archive and the materials. She told me no one was going to touch that. And in just one conversation, I came to understand why she would touch it. And I learned how trustworthy, how patient, and how committed this historian is to preserving and protecting knowledge, however controversial, for future scholars. This is one of the most shocking things I've ever seen in my life. And I asked her, can you send me the first letter he sent you and the envelope, if you have it? Based on the contents of the manifesto, It seemed a perfect fit for the Labadie collection. The discussion of the anti-tech movement, back to land movement, etc. They all coalesce in various forms of anarchism. But as Julie points out, for the record, Ted Kaczynski never considered himself an anarchist. It's other people, the ones who identified with some of his ideas, the ones involved in movements of feminism, LGBTQ issues, anti-war movements, who called themselves anarchists. The major threat, as I noticed, that he was worried about was technology. That was going to kill everything, he said. So for all these anarchic movements and ideas that people were writing to him about, that would all be moot once technology got hold of us. So Julie began her quest in '97 by contacting Kaczynski's attorney, Judy Clark, who she discovered in the newspaper. She described her interest and why the University of Michigan would be an ideal place for Kaczynski to house his archive. Imagine her surprise when she did not hear back from the lawyer, but rather received this priority mail envelope in her mailbox. No warning, just a piece of mail from a notorious criminal who'd been convicted for sending bombs through the mail. I don't even know why. I would run so fast. So when I asked her how she felt upon seeing the envelope, she said the words you see on the screen. And I'm going to play you a little bit more about what she said regarding that first package.
The very first letter I got from him was a package of letters that he received, and he wasn't allowed to keep more than 20 letters in his cell at any given time, and if he did, he had to throw them away and he didn't know where to send them. So when he got my letter, he just started sending them to me.
So you became the archive right off the bat.
Yeah, but with the understanding that we didn't have an agreement as to what I was going to do with the letters. So he was basically saying, if you want them, keep them, and if you don't, you can't send them back to me because I can't keep them. But I did keep them. I kept them, and then they just kept coming and coming and coming to the point where I had 20 boxes.
This is a section of the first 6-page letter she received. I really cannot imagine seeing my name in his handwriting, and it laid out what he would provide to the university and what he needed in return if they were to move forward with the acquisition. Kept everything basic, she said. This is what I need to say to you. This is what I need to hear back from you. No chit-chat, no talking about his case in any way. No questions except for the basic ones he needed to know. Here is another clip from our conversation.
He trusted you. First of all, he trusted you probably before he hardly even knew what he was doing by sending you those letters. He's lucky it was you. I mean...
He is lucky it was me.
Right? I mean, what could have happened in the wrong hands?
I did my best, because knowing that he had so little control over his life and his materials, and he wanted more and more control all the time, I think it's human nature. Mm-hmm. He couldn't really do much if somebody wrote an article that was not completely true or that he disagreed with. He couldn't do anything about it.
That's interesting, yeah.
But the papers made him and his life much more accessible than he ever dreamed it would have been, I think.
So one promise he needed from her upon receiving the letters was to protect the privacy of the correspondents that were sending them to him. Many of them were still alive and had no idea their letter would one day be accessible in a public archive. Their letter to Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Do you really want people to know that? So she agreed that she would work on him, work on this privacy concern that he had. And as a result, as those boxes were arriving, since she had no agreement with him, she wasn't opening them or reading the letters. So here she is compiling this archive, and she doesn't even know what she had. Meanwhile, neither did the university. Technically, her boss knew what was happening and was supportive of the acquisition. But the provost at the time was less than enthusiastic. The news of his arrest and his affiliation to the university wasn't necessarily something you wanted to crow about. You don't want to remind the public that the Unabomber belongs to you. To her credit, the provost was thinking ahead, how is this going to affect the university in the future? But the president at the time, Lee Bollinger, was a free speech scholar and helped move the process along. Eventually, the parties reached a gift agreement, and Julie could start reading some of those letters, like this one, from a person who identified with Kaczynski's back to the land philosophy. So I'm just going to read a little excerpt. Another thing I liked about your book, though this may sound trite, this writer writes to Kaczynski, was the interview at the end about food gathering and such. It harkened back to my readings of Thoreau on finding sustenance in the woods. It also allowed me to ruminate further on the writings of the transcendentalists, like Emerson's Self-Reliance. I apologize if this all sounds rather naive. I just wanted to share how some of your writing has touched my life. Other letters contained varied and personal artifacts, photographs, scented paper, prayers, and questions about Kaczynski's life before and after prison. He also kept copies of his replies. Here is a 2013 request from someone who was working on term paper about him. Kaczynski sent a thoughtful reply and directed the person to the U of M archive.
Well, he appealed to so many different kinds of people with so many different ideas. And sometimes you just didn't know why they picked Ted Kaczynski to write to, but a lot of them were just imagined in their imagined lives. There was some connection with him, the way he lived his life out, off the grid in a remote place, loved nature and beauty. And so those kinds of things they identified with. Some people wrote to him, and they wrote him like algebraic questions, and
God.
some people just were young, trying to find their way in the world. What do you think about this? Just really random things.
Which is why, as you'll note in this slide, the identity of the writer has been redacted. Julie said it all became clear once she started reading the letters and seeing what they contained, why Kaczynski was so concerned with privacy on their behalf from the beginning. And though he wanted to keep all of the original letters sealed for 50 years, she could not accommodate that request, right? She's an archivist. The very nature of her job is to make the stuff publicly accessible. But knowing that a lot of the writers were quite young when they wrote these letters, some teenagers are in their 20s or 30s, she knew that a lesser closure time would not protect those people. So what she decided to do, she was determined to find a path forward where she could make the content accessible and satisfy both her and Kaczynski. So she spoke to many, many, many of her colleagues in the business, and they decided the team would keep each original intact and sealed for 50 years. But first, they would make a copy of each letter, as you see here, black out any identifying information on the public-facing photocopies, and make them available. So when he died in prison on June 10th, 2023, which is what motivated me to reach out to her, he was serving overlapping life sentences. Kaczynski was 81 and had been suffering from cancer, but news reports called his death a suicide. And she didn't explain why, but she is convinced that was not the case. She was still processing his death at the time, actually, and coming to terms with the fact that no more letters would be coming. No more content would be arriving in the future. But what she did say about what she had received and what the collection does contain, in addition to the manifesto, he wrote essays, short stories, and a few books that can be purchased online. He wrote musical scores, even though he couldn't play an instrument. He also could read and write in Russian, Spanish, and German, so he often wrote letters to people in those languages as well. And the manifesto itself has been published into more than a dozen languages. In 1998, he had pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and represented himself in the subsequent legal appeals process, so he forwarded all his court filings and other internal prison documents to her as well. Clearly, and unfortunately, his violent legacy continues to influence others, and not in a good way. I like this headline about Luigi Mangione, the supposed anti-hero who murdered an insurance executive in cold blood and in broad daylight, where the headline says, "Don't read the Unabomber's manifesto, read the obituaries." So Julie never met Kaczynski in person, never spoke to him on the phone, never saw his collection in its native environment. A lot of times archivists travel to the person's home or see the materials in their basement or the garage, whatever. And initially the archive was limited to the prison correspondence. That's where she started. All she was getting were letters that people were writing to him. Eventually, the university did acquire his writings and materials that were in the Montana cabin when he was arrested. Due to his crimes and the themes that animate his writing, the archive has always been controversial and somewhat sensationalized, and it attracts a lot of media interest. And it's one of the most popular collections Julie oversees, and interest has clearly increased since his death, and now with our friend Mangione here. It's really sensational, and people are interested in it for all kinds of reasons, and as a result, she's very protective. Some of the more legitimate research uses that have come out of it recently, a recent book from the Cambridge University Press is titled Searching for Eco-Terrorism, The Crucial Case of the Unabomber. An article in the Journal of Political Ideologies is titled The Unabomber and the Origins of Anti-Tech Radicalism. She told me also that a prominent documentary filmmaker is working on a movie that will include the Kaczynski Papers. So as part of her job, she takes those requests in, evaluates them, and decides who she's going to work with. Last fall, she gave a workshop to a group from the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute that had specifically requested a session where they could learn about and engage with the Kaczynski Papers. And it was so successful that they requested a redo this fall. But not everyone is so trustworthy, and Julie is intensely protective, and she is very protective even with me. I discovered in looking at the transcript of my interview with her that she never answered a question. She never spoke unless I asked her a specific question with a question mark at the end. She did not just engage in conversation freely, which taught me a valuable lesson. Stop talking and ask a question. But at the end of our conversation, I did ask her, it's kind of weird, like you're so respectful of him, and you did what he asked, and you really seemed to empathize with him and his situation regarding his privacy and his materials. And I said, don't you feel like, you're sort of, he didn't respect his victims. Why are you respecting his wishes? Do you ever feel like you may be glorifying these acts of violence?
I guess I don't see it as glorifying their acts of violence. I don't look at it that way at all. It's preserving history. It's preserving knowledge for the future. And knowing how people use that material and what they're interested in is part of my job. I have to put aside, my thoughts and my feelings about his actions in order to preserve history and to further scholarship.
So his recent death in 2023 is a potent reminder as to how important and contemporary Julie's work is. You often think of archives as being like, ancient materials or something. This is very real, very present, and very contemporary. And I think, after speaking to her and after talking to you, I think we can all agree that these materials and those who authored them are in very safe and responsible hands. And I was struck by the fact that Julie was able to convince the very anti-academic Kaczynski that academia would best serve his archive. And that pretty much tells you everything you need to know about the curator of the Labadie collection. Thank you very much.
All right. Do we? Yeah, I think I may need your help here.
Yeah, so
Tech support. Sorry.
let's just close all of that.
Okay.
There you go.
Oh. I probably could have figured that out myself, and I just didn't. Thank you. All right, that's a tough act to follow. Thanks, everybody. I'm Katie Vloot. I'm the editor at LSA Magazine, and I write history pieces for a lot of publications on campus. The one I'm going to talk about tonight is one that I did for the Bentley Historical Library magazine. And it's interesting, too. I didn't know exactly what Deb was going to be talking about tonight, and something became very clear when I was listening to her, there are a lot of parallels with the person I'm talking about, but there's one very important thing that is not a parallel. So we're going to be talking about Dr. Jack Kevorkian, and he was somebody who also spoke many languages, was brilliant, and had composed music, did a lot of the same things that Ted Kaczynski did. Yes, studied at Michigan, a lot of these parallels, but very important differences too, so do not think that we are trying to equate the two. Also, I want to say too, there are some historians and archivists in this room. That is not what I do. I have the luxury of being able to swoop in and do a 1,500-word piece about somebody who's very interesting, and there are people who do a very thorough job with much longer pieces and much more in-depth work. And I can kind of swoop in, swoop out. Usually what I do in my work is talk to people who are living. And so it's kind of a nice break, honestly, to go into the archives and just be able to live in that space for a little bit. The assignment that I was given with the Jack Kevorkian story was, there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. Go forth, find something. And so I started digging through the archives, and there was a wonderful finding aid written by somebody in this room, and it was really detailed, and it taught me a lot about Jack Kevorkian that I did not know. His first assisted suicide was 1990. I was a high school student in Michigan. We talked about it a lot. This was something that came up a lot, and here is that there were horrible jokes that people were making in school about it. And I also will never forget my school librarian. Somebody came in and said that they wanted to do their research on euthanasia, and she was looking at young people on a continent. And so euthanasia was not something that people knew about, including the high school librarian where I went, and I think she's still probably confused by that. So it was she had no idea what was happening. Anyway, so we started looking at different things in the archives, and I'll ask all of you, what do you know about Dr. Jack Kevorkian? What comes to mind? A van, yeah. What happened in that van?
I don't know, is it at the Henry Ford?
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Oh, is it? Yeah. What was he known as? Does anybody remember? Dr. Death. Dr. Death. And he sort of embraced that nickname. He didn't seem to mind it because he was he knew, I think to a certain degree, that he was going to be making waves in this space. And this is, and he had this appearance, and he had this flamboyant lawyer who he brought into our lives for much longer. And he had all of these people who had written to him and had asked for his help. So these are some of them here. So one of the things that I found in the archives and in the finding aid was he was an artist. He loved doing his artwork. We thought maybe we'll focus on the artwork in the story. We decided not to. And I apologize if that haunts your dreams, but that is why we were not going to be doing that. But there was another really interesting theme that emerged. There were all of these letters, of course, and I had known of some of those, and they're very sweet and touching. And this one says, "I'm 42 years old and I have MS. Will you help me? My MS is chronic, progressive, and I was diagnosed almost 11 years ago. Over the years, I have done everything from bee stings to chemotherapy. I am in constant, unbearable pain. The only relief from it is when I get some sleep. Currently, I take muscle relaxers, painkillers, etc." And it goes on to say, "Can you help me? Please call Collect." And that was one of his patients, one of his clients, and there were many others. And I think that what I knew going into this was how connected he felt to the patients whom he helped and how connected they felt to him. What I didn't realize until I did this was how many families of those people remained close with him. They invited him to their family potlucks. They called each other cousins. They were very important to him and he to them. And it changed my entire image of this man who was Dr. Death, who was, this punchline of jokes in the early 90s, to somebody who had a lot more layers. He was an artist, he was a composer, he spoke all of these languages, he was quite brilliant. And he was also this guy that they would say, come join us on this weekend and we'll have potato salad. And the kind of rethinking of that image that we have of somebody has stayed with me. And I have actually found myself many times defending him in conversations with people. Like he was, there was a lot more to him. He was a really interesting person. He was not Ted Kaczynski. He was, he was something entirely different. And I wanted to say, too, one of the things that I think helped me to realize that about him was something that was in the story that I wrote. The archivist who worked on this said something to me, and I used this quote in the story, and she talked about how the families were his biggest supporters. And she said, he found a key to their soul. And so I will leave it with that. And yeah, it's a little more touching than it's maybe not quite as interesting as Ted Kaczynski, but maybe a little bit more touching. Thank you.
And more surprising, I think.
Maybe more surprising,
Yeah.
yeah. And I will hand it over to Kim Clark.
I am going to tell you a story about Robin Fleming, who was a president of the University of Michigan. I unboxed this story going through his papers that are at the Bentley Historical Library, and I was inspired to do it by a couple of paragraphs that are in his memoir, which is called Tempests into Rainbows. Robin Fleming was the 9th president of the University of Michigan. He came here in 1968 from the University of Wisconsin. He was chancellor of the Madison campus. If you know anything about 1968, it was not a good year for the United States. We had the Tet Offensive in January in Vietnam, where it was very apparent very fast that we were not winning the war. Lyndon Johnson decided to not run for re-election, which surprised a lot of people. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. There was a lot of unrest on college campuses, including our campus. And students were upset about the war. They were upset about civil rights. There were local issues that had them in the streets. And Robin Fleming himself became pretty disturbed by the Vietnam War. And he felt he needed to say something. He was being asked to say something. And so in September of 1969, he decided to speak at an anti-war teach-in that was at Hill Auditorium. There were about 5,000 people there. He had consulted with some people and said he was going to do this. And so he got up and he said that this war is a colossal mistake. That it was robbing the country of young people for a very questionable cause. I'm going to quote him. He said, "Death on the battlefields of Vietnam is not a statistic. It is a tragedy in the lives of a whole network of human beings." And this moment from his presidency has always been very notable, that he got up and spoke out against the war. And he got, of course, some backlash from people, and he also got support for this. As the university's president, he had a reputation. Of course, students always, are suspicious of the university president and critical, but he had a nice touch with students. He always listened to them. His background, he was a labor negotiator as an attorney, and he made a point of, trying to hear what the students were saying. So, like in this photo here, there'd been a protest, one of many, during his presidency. Students are flooding his lawn at night. They were carrying torches. And he came out on the front porch and talked to them. And you can find episodes throughout his presidency where he just sort of wades into the crowd. And he wants to talk to the students. He's trying to calm them down. So when he gives this talk at Hill Auditorium and he comes out against the Vietnam War, I think he was reflecting back about 25 years earlier to a different war, and one that he was directly involved in. And of course, that's World War II. Robin Fleming is a young man. He was an attorney with the Army. He enlisted in 1943. He had graduated from law school about 2 years earlier. And by 1945, he is with a unit in Germany called the American Military Government of Occupied Territories. And what this unit, this outfit, this military government group does is it is moving into the cities in Germany that are collapsing. And they are working to restore some semblance of government and order in these communities so that as more and more American troops come in to Germany, move toward Berlin, the American troops are safe. So the military government that Fleming is associated with, they're setting up hospitals, or not really hospitals, but healthcare for people who are sick and injured, rationing food because there was a lot of hunger in Germany at this point. Germany is on the brink of falling apart. They install police officers, they establish some jails, and they also set up a court system so that they can uphold justice and ensure that due process is carried out. And of course, these are the principles that the Allies are fighting for on both fronts around the world. These are just a couple photos here of the devastation in Germany and some looting that was taking place when a train was derailed. So in early 1945, Fleming's with this group, and he is ordered to represent two Germans who have been charged with espionage. They've been found hiding near some American soldiers. And much like you might have a public defender today if you couldn't afford an attorney, the military provided a public defender, Robin Fleming, to represent these two Germans who are facing espionage charges. Now, he objected to this. He did not want to take this case for a couple of reasons. They gave him a half day to prepare the defense, and he did not want to defend people who were facing the death penalty, and that was what the sentence was if you were convicted of espionage. So he said, I am not going to do this. And of course, the military said, yes, you are, soldier. And he said, of course, the military, why are they going to listen to a lieutenant like me? But what he was really upset about was the fact that the two Germans he was defending were 16 years old. And their names were Heinz Petrie and Joseph Schoener. They had already signed confessions, so Fleming had nothing to work with. And so he met with them, and they told him their story, that they had been with the Hitler Youth, which you were if you were a boy in Nazi Germany. If you didn't join, your parents would often be put in jail or worse. This was a goal of Hitler, to Nazify education and youth groups. So the boys said that they had been with a Hitler Youth group and they ran away. And they got caught, and so then they were conscripted into forced labor, and they were sent to a penal camp for wayward Hitler Youth. Once they were there, a German officer came up to him and said, I think I can help you out if you want to get out of this situation. All you have to do is go behind enemy lines, look for the American troops, and tell us where their artillery positions are. So the boys said, okay, we'll do that. They were really bad spies. They lasted less than 24 hours. They had started out on their mission, and really within a couple of hours, they realized this is a bad idea. They slept in a barn overnight, and then some American soldiers captured them. And talking with them, Fleming realizes they were just victims of this Nazi system. But still, there's going to be a trial. So the trial begins. It's in a city that looks a lot like this, absolutely wrecked. There's no electricity in this town. Fleming feels sympathy for these boys, but he's also very upset because if they had succeeded with their spy mission and were able to share military information with German soldiers, it put the lives of American GIs in danger. So he decided that he would plead for mercy with the court. See, he used three arguments. He said, one, they're 16 years old. Two, they aren't really spies. They had no formal training as spies. And they were coerced by this German officer who made them this promise that, he would spring them if they brought back some good information. The trial lasted a day. The prosecution spoke all day, and then it went on into the evening. By now it's dark outside, there's no electricity, and Robin Fleming is presenting his defense by candlelight before the military panel of officers. These are all, there's a panel of officers, and there's what they call the president of the court, which is the judge. They hear the arguments, the jury leaves the room. A short time later, they come back, and before the jury can hand its verdict to the president of the court, an officer walks up to Robin Fleming and says, "I need you to hand over your sidearm." And that's when Fleming knew that the boys were going to be convicted. Because if the boys heard that they were going to be getting the death penalty, there was a concern that they would try to grab his pistol out of his holster, shoot him, shoot the judge, shoot themselves. So right away he knows this is not good. So he hands over his gun. And he listens as the judge says, to the boys that you're guilty. And he said, "You will pay the supreme penalty for your offenses so that the German people will know that we intend to use whatever force is necessary to eradicate completely the blight of German militarism and the Nazi ideology from the face of the earth." All of this is, of course, very upsetting to Robin Fleming. And that comes through in his letters that are at the Bentley. There are letters to his wife, there are letters to his mother, letters to his brother who is in the army serving stateside. He's upset and he's conflicted by this, and it's also happening over Easter weekend, so there's the emotion of not being at home and whatnot. And he just said to all of them, it's just a pity that they had to put these kids to death, but the Nazis are utterly unscrupulous. The letters to his wife are particularly touching because, as you might imagine, he's saying, I just need you right now. I wish I could talk to you because you always make things better and help me see straight. And he said something that I think many soldiers have probably thought, regardless of the war. He wrote, "I suppose that sometimes it might sound like I'm doing a lot of interesting things. In a sense, I suppose I am, but so much of it is so empty, so boresome, and so without humanity." The next day, Fleming is told to go meet with the boys to file their appeal, which was an automatic step in a death penalty case. I was going through Fleming's papers and came across several sheets of paper in very light handwriting in German. And I'll be honest, I went right past them. I'm like, I don't read German. And then I went, oh, I wonder what those were. I went back, and they're the boys' handwritten pleas to the court. They wrote the exact same letters, but in their own handwriting. This is Joseph Shaner's letter. And I believe what happened then was an army clerk typed up these pleas, and that's what went up through the appeals system. When Fleming met with them in their jail cell, he could tell that the one boy, Joseph Shaner, had been crying. He said it was the first time that either boy had really showed any emotion. But one of the things these two teenagers argued was that this punishment is too severe. We don't feel that our debt is that big that we should receive the death penalty. And Fleming thought the same thing. He was really hoping that because it was pretty apparent the war was going to be ending soon, that the Army would commute the sentences of these teenagers and, consider another approach with the war being over. As he's leaving the jail with the boys' appeals, he sees a couple of MPs coming in with 2 more German teenagers who pretty much have the same story that Petrie and Shaner had. And it just occurred to him, this is ridiculous. The Nazis are just serving up these kids to do this work. And this is the game they're going to play, and all it's going to mean is that these teenagers everywhere are going to be sentenced to death. Robin Fleming never sees these boys again. He moves on, catches up with his unit, which is moving deeper into Germany toward Berlin. He's tired, he's exhausted, he's disgusted. That very much comes through in his letters. He saw a lot of horrible things, like a lot of soldiers did in those last few weeks of the war. Germany, of course, surrendered. Hitler committed suicide, and the war was over on May the 8th of 1945. A month later, Joseph Shaner and Heinz Petrie are informed that their appeals have been rejected. So the MPs take them to a gravel pit, and one at a time march them up to a wooden post, tie them to it, and a 12-man firing squad of military policemen shoot and kill them. These photos are of Joseph Shaner. He was the second one to face the firing squad. You can see there is a priest who is giving him last rites. And down in the lower left corner is a coffin, and that's where his body was going to be placed after he was killed. The Army photographed this entire episode. They also made a film of it, motion picture film, which you can find on YouTube if you would like to watch it. Robin Fleming learns about this a week later when he's reading Stars and Stripes newspaper. It's just a little blurb in a buried page. He was certain that these sentences would be commuted. He was, again, conflicted, upset. And this episode just, I think, if you look at his papers, it's in his letters, it's in his diary. When he came home from the war, he wrote a manuscript. He wanted to have a book published about his wartime experience. He didn't find a publisher, but the manuscript is in the Bentley's papers. And he talks about this episode. He understood the rationale for why the boys had to be executed, because it risked American lives, but he just was so distraught by the fact that they were teenagers. So, we're talking about World War II, his experience with Vietnam. He's talking about what's going on. Different wars, different ideologies, but really young people who are caught up in the decisions of an older generation. And in his memoir, he wrote, talking about the World War II episode, he said, they were only 16 years old, and it seemed a pity that they had to be a last-minute casualty of the war. I thought of 16-year-old American boys and what a tragedy it would be to have their lives cut short by the mistakes of their elders. I think this episode just speaks to Robin Fleming's humanity and the compassionate leadership that he showed leading Michigan during a really difficult era in our history. Thank you very much.
Wow, I'm not quite sure what to say there, but thank you. Those were all really interesting and thought-provoking papers and a little depressing, I won't lie. But I'm going, as the host, I'm going to take my ability to ask you a couple of questions. But first I wanted to ask, is there any comments or questions you have for each other? Some of these paper stories you've heard from each other before, some is the first time, but do you have any comments for each other?
I have a question about the Kaczynski letters. Can I just go to the Grand Library and look at them?
No, you would have to talk to her first.
That's kind of what I
And have
thought.
a legitimate reason why.
Yes.
She is so protective and would really do a lot of research before she would let anyone go. Now you, she would probably say yes.
I just didn't
You'd
know.
have to ask an exact question.
Yes.
first.
Yes,
Yes,
make
yes.
sure it's formed as a
Yes.
Ask the
question.
question.
Yeah.
You want us to, nice.
Yeah, would you please use the hand mic, sorry, just so everybody can hear you.
I have a question for you. Or a comment, actually. I just find it so intriguing that you saw that connection and made that connection. At what point?
My theory, too.
Yeah, it is your theory, but I think it just shows the creativity that comes when you start searching for something. You thought you were just going to, I don't know. It's always interesting when you go into the archive and it takes a turn.
Well, and I would just say it helps to have a great archive. I mean, the Fleming papers are quite detailed, and so it was really interesting to go through them and to find things like his military ID card, and kind of go, oh my God, look at Robin Fleming, he's a baby. So all credit goes to the Bentley for having these papers.
You were looking at those, I think, at a time when things were happening on campus that were fairly tense. Is that right? Or was it a different?
This was a year ago?
Yeah, so when we
Yeah.
were having our own protests
Yes.
here for different reasons.
Did you find yourself thinking, how might he have handled that?
Yes, I did. I just thought of how often he would go in and interact with the students. And I was missing that in 2024. And I think there's a lot to be said for just, I generally don't think our students are going to hurt the president of the university. And they are our students, and I believe we should listen to them. It doesn't mean we're going to agree, but I think a lot can be achieved by trying to have a conversation. And I think Fleming tried to do that a lot. I mean, there are other Fleming experts here in the room.
Those were turbulent times in the country.
Sorry, can you please wait till we bring you a microphone, just so our,
Thank you. These were definitely turbulent times in our country. How many people in Ann Arbor actually knew this about Robin Fleming?
I don't think many. I never saw anything where he spoke about it. The first time I saw it, it's in his memoir, which came out in the 80s. And it's really just a couple of paragraphs talking about what happened. So.
Isn't it too bad?
Yeah, but it's also, I think, with a lot of World War II veterans, they came home and they didn't talk about what they were doing. So I guess it doesn't surprise me, but he clearly, it was clearly bothering him because he wrote about it and wrote about it and wrote about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's what I think is so interesting too, because so often we talk about Robin Fleming like as a great negotiator and whatnot, and we connect it to his career as a labor law attorney, or, that was what he did professionally. And that's why he was so effective as a president here in those times. But then you learn this story, and it adds a whole nother layer. And that's what's so fascinating. I really appreciate it.
People are very layered, and there's often a backstory. So, again, it was very interesting to uncover going through his papers.
So valuable.
I'm kind of curious too. I think I have a microphone. You can have that one. So, Katie, you've talked about, and as you talked about, and you've all talked about it here a little, but how did the process of researching and writing these stories change your view of these three men? I mean, it seems to have definitely given Robin Fleming a lot more depth than sort of for you, Kim, and you talked about Dr. Kevorkian. But I'm curious, is there anything else that changed in your? Or are you more the archivist? Amazing work the archivist did with Ted Kaczynski collection changed your view of archivists, maybe.
Yeah, for me, definitely learning about how, just how respectful and committed Julie was to responding to Kaczynski's wishes. I think that as a professional and as the curator of the Labadie collection, she saw this as a very valuable aspect, something to add to the collection that would definitely inform scholarly research going forward. And for her, she just had this ingrained commitment to respecting the material, protecting the man's privacy, and protecting the privacy of the people whose letters she was receiving. And I was just really struck by that. The fact that she sought it out and then engaged in this correspondence with him for years, and it just, as a result, she has this very valuable archive. But yeah, I think that was what stayed with me. Not so much about him, but more just about her courage in reaching out to him and continuing to correspond with him. He killed people, you know? I was like, oh, I wouldn't want to speak to that man. And she was like, look, I'm a historian and I need to protect this material in a way I know will best serve the future and for knowledge. And that she knew who she was, and she knew what her integrity was and what her commitment to her profession was. And that's why she went for it. And we're lucky that she did. Other people, other librarians or archivists might not be as responsible as her. And it could really go off in the wrong hands and people could be very irresponsible with the material and the information. And like glorify him or sensationalize him in some way. That's absolutely not her desire.
One thing that struck me, particularly when I was watching the footage of these executions, so this is a very hard moment for Robin Fleming. I want to know what it was like for those 12 military policemen who were the firing squad. In the footage, you see them afterward, and they're all kind of just huddled around a Jeep, and they're smoking cigarettes, and they're kind of talking and chatting, and I'm like, this is like a day's work, or are you just so stressed out? I don't know. But I would, of course, love to know their stories, and how do you, why are you assigned to that awful duty, and what is it like to live with something like that? So there's always another story.
Yeah, I'd like to be the guy that's filming it, too.
Oh.
Who are these people? That's so awful.
It's war. Yep.
I have one other question, and then I'll open it up to the audience. And this is for you, Katie. I'm kind of curious. One of the main elements of Deborah's talk was about sort of the ethics of collecting, who has access. I'm curious, are there any discussions, are there concerns with the Dr. Kevorkian collection that came up when you were researching into it, or restrictions on that as well?
We actually have probably a much greater expert here about it if we would like to go in that route. His niece or grandniece, I think, was the person who was his sole heir who gave the collection. And I think that, can I hand this to Olga?
Sure.
Would it be okay?
Yes, his niece donated the materials to the Bentley, and she did not provide any restrictions, meaning collection. The gift agreement states that she transferred all the copyright that she held, actually, because there are other materials there where she didn't hold the copyright, and there are no restrictions of access except for the Medicide files, and so materials of actual people he helped. He called them Medicide, and the Medicide files are absolutely open for research, but to view the audiovisual materials, the interviews he had with them, you must come to the Bentley Historical Library. You can't download them. You can't do it from your home. And also, you cannot, there are paper materials there as well, and you can research them, but there is no duplication of any kind.
Is there a point at which they will be available that way? Is there like a period of time?
We don't know yet, and that's all I'm going to say right now.
And the collection also has videos?
Yes.
with the patients?
Yes. Those are interviews. So he usually had videotaped meetings with them. Sometimes there are family members there. Those videos were taken by his sister who passed away. And sometimes those are the very last meetings. And there are also some audio files of people who reached out to him and asked for help. This collection to me is more about them than about him. That's his legacy, is their story.
I think at this point we're going to open it up to the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand and wait for one of our wonderful docents to bring you a microphone so that way everybody can hear you. Please, and if the online audience, please feel free to type your question into the chat, and our lovely Greg Parker will get to you.
Hearing all three of the presentations, the one thing that came to my mind most deeply is the concept of reoccurrence, and that the archives have many issues in terms of validity of what they represent, particularly in the terms of reoccurrence.
Do you mean in the sense of history repeating itself?
Yes.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
why they're so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the papers, depending, whichever archive they are, they just show the human side of what people are dealing with, which often gets lost in the newspaper accounts and the television reports and whatnot. So when you have diaries and letters and telegrams, it puts that human face on it. But yes, we do see these things happen over and over again.
If I don't stand, my nuns are going to roll over in their grave. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. My nuns will kill me. For two things, I want to thank you so much. I don't want to cry about this. In this time we're living in, I mean, I adore history. I love history. I spent my life in libraries. You are living through this terrible time. Every attack on a library or every attempt to strip history. So thank you for everything. And I hope we all survive this time and everything stays intact. That's my first thing. And the second thing I wanted to say was you mentioned about people filming. I have so many feelings about the Kevorkian thing, but also Robin Fleming's. My father was in World War II. And one of the things I found, like a lot of veterans, he had this huge history, 6-inch thick book called The Complete History of World War II, which I pored over as a child. And I've always read a lot of history about that, and history of every sort. When I was in my early teens, I babysat for a family with 5 boys who almost all were taller than I was. And the father had been in the military, and he had an encyclopedia of the war. So as soon as the boys were in bed, I pulled out those books, and I would go through. And to this day, from like the age of 14, one image stands out with everything I've seen of the war. There's one page where I opened it up, and it were young German boys, not old enough to even be wearing a uniform, who had been captured by the Allies. And I always see this face. One boy had turned his face like this, and there were tears streaming out of his eyes. And no matter what I've seen, this is the vision I see of this poor young German boy with, terrorized. And so your story sort of brought that back. But thank you again.
Thank you. I know when I'm doing this story, so I of course, go to Google. Gosh, are there any photos of this? Yes. And then there's the footage of it. And I'm like, oh my God, I truly cannot believe that this is available, that I can just look at it. And that has really stuck with me. Very disturbing.
But the people, I think, behind the camera, they're recording history. So I think
Yes, yes.
I
think it's important to have that.
Yes, it's going to live, and it's going to bring to you You know, I think they're the people that are most amazing, is the photographers, whether it's stills or film, because they're doing their job, but sometimes I think their photographer's eye goes way beyond, you know, capturing the moment.
One thing that Fleming wrote about was on the day of the trial, between the arguments being completed and the jury coming back with the verdict, he was sitting with the boys, and then he was walking around outside, and he runs into this CBS radio reporter, a guy named Eric Severide, who you might recognize his name, and he just strikes up a conversation with Severide, who Fleming said he's going to do a report on this. I've never been able to find any recording or transcript, but I thought that was kind of interesting that there was a reporter there covering the trial, and he apparently complimented Fleming on his defense. But as Fleming wrote, you know, to no avail.
Out of curiosity, is the footage on YouTube, is that posted by sort of a U.S. government archive?
It's posted by British Pathe, is that how you pronounce it? P-A-T-H-E? Huge British news archive.
Huh.
So.
I don't know if it's better or worse that it's an actual archive rather
Yeah,
than...
and I'm sure they must have this footage also at our national archives. I just don't know that it's been digitized online.
Other questions?
Yeah, I did want to mention something. I think I can do it without the microphone.
Please use the microphone.
Thank you. One of the things I noticed when you were showing the, you know, different images, all of a sudden I saw some of the records of it, and it said Aachen. It took place in Aachen. And
yes.
Aachen is right at the Rhine. It's the first place the Allies crossed into Germany.
Yes.
And we were there last summer, and so as soon as I thought, because their emotions were sky high because this was the first time they were stepping foot in Germany. And so I all of a sudden I saw Aachen, and I thought, oh, okay.
Yes,
maybe.
that's the area where the boys
Maybe
were
that was the
caught.
Well, I have a question, and slightly lighter-hearted question maybe. So I know, Katie, you said you normally write about people who are still alive, but if you could write a story about anybody involved in U of M's history, who would you, that you know we have something about, let's layer it just a little, at one of our wonderful libraries, who would you like to write about?
That's hard.
Are you saying if you could talk to them today, or just dive into their papers?
Into their papers if you know we have them, or I guess if you want to talk to them, I'll open it up to that.
I'm always fascinated by Alexander Ruthven, president during the Depression and during World War II. His memoir, I find it hysterical. He had an incredibly dry sense of humor. I laugh out loud every time I read it because of some of the things he writes about faculty. So my Ruthven was is it a herpetologist? He studied snakes. He had his PhD in zoology. And I'm just telling this story because he writes about it in his memoir. He's got on the shelf a book of snakes, you know, some kind of directory, and he refers to it as the faculty directory. It just made me laugh. And I know the Ruthven papers are voluminous. I've looked at some of them, but I think there's probably a lot of interesting nuggets in there. LSA Magazine did a piece on him several years ago that I really enjoyed reading.
I've read some things that Kim has written and that Jim Tobin has written and that others have written about some of the early women on campus, but I would love to have a little bit more, I would love to be able to ask some questions of what it was really like. I had written some about some of the first women medical students, and they had to go into separate rooms to do
hens. Didn't they call them the hens? The hens.
And so things like that I would love to actually be able to have. We get little glimpses into their lives in some of the archives, but it would be nice to be able to have that conversation.
I thought of mine. I'm really interested in Frances Kelsey because it's so romantic and sepia-toned and adventurous and interesting. You know, here these guys are going off on ships and traveling the world and digging up artifacts. And according to I'm pretty sure it was George Swain, who was a university photographer at the time that Kelsey was on his various adventures. He literally we have the largest collection of ancient papyri here due to him, which is pretty amazing. But Swain made a comment that I read in Kelsey's obituary that said he demonstrated the most integrity in the field. And, archaeology it's people digging up things and taking them from their native land. But in the course of doing so, he always apparently had the appropriate permission to do so and interacted with the appropriate people and wasn't a jerk in other ways. And I was saddened to learn in reading his obituary that when he died, he was waiting on 20 huge crates that were coming from Egypt and elsewhere, filled with all kinds of things, and that he passed away unexpectedly and was never able to see when they converted Newberry Hall, which had been a building owned by the Student Christian Association at the time. Eventually, the university acquired that building and turned it into the Kelsey Museum, but he did not live to see that. So I would just love to go inside the swashbuckling world with these adventurers and explorers and see what that was like back then, once upon a time, long ago.
Well, the Bentley has a lot of those records.
I know, I need to go dive in.
I would be curious, because we have people here who are clearly interested in U of M history. What stories would you love to know more about? Give us some ideas to pursue. Yeah. What are we missing? What do you know that we don't know?
Well, I do know none of you chose me, which is very depressing.
Well,
so.
there's time, Andrew.
But I think we have a question from the live stream.
No, it's actually for me, actually. I wondered about what's not in the archive. So as writers, when we read your wonderful pieces, they seem fully formed, fully finished, like the entire story exists. So you go to the archives and it's there, but really when you do this research, you have to fill in a lot of gaps. And I wonder if you could maybe shed some light on that process and how because I know there's a lot of creativity that goes into that. How do you do that? How do you fill in those gaps? And it's not just, I don't mean just going to another archive and finding the source. I mean, how do you have to maybe really dig in and use detective work to fill in these blanks?
That's definitely a question for Kim. She's the queen of that.
I'm just going to share one story that I did, and it was on a woman named Mary Henrietta Graham. She was the first black woman to enroll at U of M, 1876. There's not a lot of information about her. We didn't keep a lot of records like that. But she is noted, and there are some photos of her, a beautiful woman, sitting in a class of a bunch of white people. So I'm trying to find out, what is her life like when she is here as a student? Even though she's not, I don't find her really in any of these student newspapers of that era. So I sort of flip it and take it from the approach of, okay, where is she missing? And one of the things I did was, at this time, the university is so much smaller than it is now. And if you were a student in LSA, which she was, and let's say you wanted to drop a class or have an extra week to finish a paper, you had to go to the executive committee of LSNA, meet with them and ask this kind of permission or dispensation. And you're usually going there because, you've screwed up in some way as a student. So I went through the executive committee minutes for the 4 years that she was a student here. She never appears. So I think she's a very good student. She's not in any clubs. She doesn't show up in any of the sort of the yearbooks or the annuals that were done at that time. So is she not allowed to join them? Does she not want to join them? I know she lives in town with her mother. I just think, so all of this told me this was a pretty lonely experience for her, understandably. And so I think you sort of have to look at it from some of those types of angles. And then what I did, I just paired her story with the story of Alexander Winchell, who was on our faculty at that time. At the same time she's a student here, he's writing this incredibly racist book about sort of the origins of black people. And so it's like, and I always wonder, did they cross paths on the diag? You know, what did he think of her when he passed her by? Did she know what his views were? So I just wove that into the story.
I think that one thing you can do too is look into it as much as Kim does, and try and extrapolate from some of the information that's there and what's not there. I think something else that you can do too in some of these stories is say, here's what we don't know. And it's taken me actually a good part of my career to get to the point where I feel comfortable saying, oh, it's okay to say we don't know all of the things. And sometimes just letting readers know that is a helpful bit of information too.
Oops.
And I know a good story you could tell about detective work in the archive and trying to fill in missing pieces. It's the story of the Ku Klux Klan.
I do know this story. I think I know this story. There is a yearbook. I'm trying to think what year it is, 1867, 68. Every page is a student organization, a student group, a lot of social groups, fraternities. U of M's all male at this point. Flip through it, and you come to a page that says the Ku Klux Klan chapter from the University of Michigan. And it has some horrible language. And then it lists the names of students who are in this organization. So I have researched who those young men were, where did they live, where did they come from, and what is it? This group never appears in a subsequent yearbook. But I did find in one of the student newspapers, they wrote an article about the fact that the yearbook, and I can't remember which yearbook it would have been, the Palladium. They would write an article saying, this year's Palladium is out. And, it's a very handsome book, blah, blah, blah. But boy, I don't know, as they wrote about, this is some pretty tasteless stuff, bad sense of humor on somebody's part. So I've never really gotten to why did they do this? Do the students think it was funny? Were they uncomfortable? It is kind of one of those mysteries that you keep trying to explain. But if you just flip through the yearbook and you see it, you go, oh, I didn't know we had that here, and I don't believe we did have that here. I think it was a very bad spoof that, of course, plenty of people would not find funny at all.
I'm sorry, so the advertisement for the Palladium said that there's a tasteless joke in there?
Yes, and I'm pretty sure they're referring to that.
Oh, wow.
What else you got?
I just have a weird comment about the value of archives and tangible history that you can research and find the true answer in light of technology today and ChatGPT. And this is related to Jim. We were working on a story, and Jim was saying it was about the football game between Michigan and Ohio State in 1969, which was Bo's first year and victory over Ohio State. And it was a time when the football team was really dismal and no one really expected them to win. And so the fact that they did win was like the greatest moment in the history of football. And literally you ask people, what's the best football game that Michigan ever played? What's the best victory Michigan ever had? Many people will say that game in 1969. Jim and I were talking about ChatGPT, and he goes, don't trust it, don't use it. I put in a U of M OSU game, and it said Ohio State won. So cross-referencing that with the valuable archive, you would learn ChatGPT is wrong. So yeah, it's very interesting. And I've been fact-checking a piece that I've been working on for, a larger piece, and I tend to go to ChatGPT and ask it the question, go to my hard hardcover book that also has the same information, and perhaps go to another website at U of M just to see what the real answer is. I'm not relying on ChatGPT for anything. Much prefer the archives.
So one person that our online audience asked maybe that you might focus on, and maybe already has been, I'm not sure, is H.H. Holmes, a la Devil in the White City, a serial killer who also was a U of M grad.
This is the category of the infamous alumni of Michigan.
Sometimes I think there must be something in the water here.
Our colleague did that story, and I don't know if she did that presentation here for this series or not, but Lara Zeeland is an H.H. Mudgett person, and she has talked about him before. We have serial killers in our midst.
You can find that in the Bentley's Collections magazine and through the Bentley's website. It's a really great story about his time here and how he was this close to flunking out, but they decided not to fail him. If there are no other questions, I'm just going to close by saying I had no idea ChatGPT was run out of Columbus, Ohio. So,
exactly, somebody put that in there.
But thank you all for this really wonderful set of presentations and this great discussion. And thank all of you for joining us this evening. If you haven't yet, I'd like you to please encourage you to check out all 3 of these wonderful publications. They're all amazing. They're all available online. They have great pictures. They're amazingly written. They have fantastic stories. And I just really want to say I really appreciate you all willing to take the time to share some of these stories with us tonight.
Thank you for being here.
I'd like to also thank Greg Parker, the director of the Detroit Observatory, for taking the time to monitor the live stream comments, and to the wonderful Michigan media team for making the live stream possible. Tonight's session will be available online on YouTube in about a week, and all of you who register to attend will get an email with a link to it for you to share, watch over again, never think about again, whatever you'd like to do. If you're here at the observatory tonight, the original observatory upstairs will be open for tours with our wonderful student docents to about 9 o'clock. I don't think we'll really do any viewing because it's still so light out, but it's really amazing to see the original telescopes. And if you're watching online, I encourage you, if you can, please come visit us yourselves soon. Otherwise, Making Michigan will return in the fall, and so I hope you'll join us then. But until then, have a good night and a wonderful summer. Thank you.